Hello, and welcome to GRYMTTRS, a podcast that talks about the connections between creativity and health and well-being. We will talk with artists, musicians, industry professionals, and some other interesting folk who like to cross the boundaries. So, let's get into it. Okay, so hi everyone. We are here with Abigail Hammond, and we're currently in her studio in New Cross Gate.
That's right, New Cross Gate. The gate's important.
Yeah. So we're talking today about Abigail's work and her journey. And my first question is, you are currently a UAL postgraduate student at Camberwell.
That's right.
If you would like to tell us what you're studying, maybe how you found yourself on that journey, on that course.
Okay, well, I'm studying the MA Visual Arts Designer Maker course, and it was a course that I'd had my eye on for about 5 years. I was working full-time, and for a long time I hadn't really thought about doing a master's, and then when I came across this one, I knew it was the one for me. So it was quite a prolonged process of saving money, paying off debts, children growing up, getting to a stage where I could then take the time to do the masters. My professional practice is as a costume designer, working predominantly with dance, so I've sort of always been a designer maker, but I wanted to explore who I would be as a solo artist. As a costume designer, I'm a collaborator, and I love to collaborate. I love to bounce ideas with other people. But I was intrigued to know what I would make as the person instigating the work. So when I started the masters, I had a clearish idea about exploring my creative journey, and my question was sort of quite loosely, what happens next? You know, within this context of being a solo artist making objects as opposed to costumes for bodies, what would I make? And a very dear friend, while I was in the summer before I started the masters, introduced me to autoethnography, which is a qualitative research methodology which puts the eye at the centre. And that absolutely sort of made sense and helped me ground this idea of what happens next in my creative journey within a sort of academic framework. And I kind of was starting with earliest memories of being creative when I was about 6, and my mum showed me how to make little dancing ladies out of fuchsia flowers and sticks. And in that summer before I went to start the course, I made these little flowers. I've got fuchsia plants in the garden. And they were kind of my first dancing costumes that my mum had taught me, and she really facilitated my creativity and my dancing as a child. So it was sort of like, well, okay, how did that progress into what I've done for 30 years as a professional, into what it's going to be now? So I was sort of exploring memory, and I wanted to work with ceramic. I'd done O-level ceramics when I was at school. I was very lucky, and it was something I'd loved, and I did a short course the year before just to kind of get my hand back in. So I envisaged myself making ceramics, possibly making jewellery, possibly making pots of some sort. That's where I thought I was going. And then I realised how much I was suffering with perimenopause. And that was the big... I'd been through quite a stressful time before I finished my full-time job, before starting the masters. And it wasn't until all that stress stopped that I realised that much of my experience, my physical and emotional experience, was obviously exacerbated by stress, but was still there. I was like, hang on a minute, you haven't gone away. What are you? This is what's going on. So that was a defining moment in realising that I couldn't really separate. You know, if I'm asking myself what happens next as a creative, well, what happens next is I'm in transition as a perimenopausal middle-aged woman. Everything is changing. And I can't set that on one side from what I'm going to make work about. So I started exploring how I would do that. And reflecting back, I realised how obvious what I've done is in relation to having been someone that's worked continually with the body, in that I started by casting parts of my own body. That it was about sort of, in a sense, kind of reproducing parts of me and looking at them. So it started with the breasts and the belly, which obviously are key sites of female, sort of physical but also emotional sites of being a woman.
And it actually takes me back to the autoethnography and the objectifying of the eye, which is interesting because then when you talk about understanding all of the influence of creativity through your life, through the body, through the movement, and now look at where you are with casting yourself, and really you're having to kind of look from the outside in while you're also going through the perimenopause.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
It's so, wow.
And I mean, it's been fantastic. You know, I find it odd when people say I'm brave to cast my body and put it out there, because it doesn't feel brave to me at all. It feels fun. I think the first casts I did, were face, belly and breasts. And, you know, we're getting used to materials. And my partner, my dear lifelong partner, Greg, who does the casting, because obviously I can't put silicone on my body and then mud rock on the top, so he's been enlisted from the beginning. And of course he's living with me in my menopause, so he's part of that. And then having done those, I was struck by gravity. I think I was just leaning over one day and thinking, oh my God, look at my breasts and my belly when I lean over. And because when I stand up, I'm, you know, relatively slim and toned, but when you hang over, everything hangs. And I was like, oh my God, I have to cast that. Because obviously, you know, gravity has a lot to do with aging, and as we sort of sag anyway. But also there's this, the symptoms of menopause are caused by the falling levels of estrogen. So there's kind of a science that I'm really interested in as well. And it's this sense that one of the feelings one can get in certain periods of your kind of cycle of menopause is that everything has gone. I always attribute it to kind of like down the plug hole. It's like someone pulled the plug out of the bath and you just went down with it. Everything has fallen away, everything has gone. So in terms of this sort of physical manifestation, to see what my body's like at 90 degrees, and it was a laugh. And I was like, how the heck are we going to cast me like that? So we found this fast-setting silicone. So you kind of like, you'd slap it onto my belly and I'd lean over and he'd kind of like sort of hold it while it went off. And then he's lying underneath me putting the mud rock on. And then we're peeling it off. And if it had, you know, even with the best sort of a high super strength Vaseline to stop you sticking to it, if it gets a few of your hairs, you certainly know about it.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of, you know, when people say brave, I just think, no, I'm just bonkers. You know, it's kind of, it's fun. It's having a laugh, really, you know, and just saying, well, of course my belly's stretched. I've had 2 children, you know. This is I sort of joke about my wrinkles. You know, my wrinkles are my memories, but you know, it's not my saying, lots of women have said it, but you know, I've earned these wrinkles, I've earned those saggy bits on my belly, and it's been a joy to have had 2 children.
But it's so empowering. So, yeah. I do find that it's quite empowering, because it's not the normal conversation that, well, I certainly don't hear women talking about it openly, because it's not something, you know, it's sitting waiting for a train and the 2 ladies next to you invite you into a conversation about the menopause symptoms or things like that. Or, you know, there are no comment to be openly empathetic about these kind of symptoms. And I think having such an expressive physical exhibition with the casting, it's really important, because I think from someone like me who hasn't yet got there but have seen other women in my family go through it, but I haven't been able to see their own exhibitions or creative expressions, to see you and yourself, it's quite universal. And I feel connected to it as a woman, because it, you know, it doesn't matter if we're related or not. I think it's because with it having that universal relationship to every woman, that's why I see it as courageous and brave and depth. And in my mind, it's not just the experience or the element of the, you know, the physical wrinkles, but more that process of unraveling our own connection to the journey. And I want to say really the symptoms themselves, because in your work, from what I've seen, how you bring forth the interpretation of the hot sweats, and what I noticed, I was really drawn to your blog when you were going through the motions of the sweat and the water and the broken glass, which are all images on your blog, which you can see, and I'll put the link below. But I mean, I know you've created the piece, you know, the projection.
Projection across the slithers of sculpted body.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that because of your experiences at night time with your symptoms as well?
I mean, I think just to sort of, before I say that, just to tag on to what you were saying, that I really felt that because it was fun making the work, and let's face it, when you've had a full-time job, to then not have a job and just be able to make the work and explore ideas is such a privilege and such fun. But also it was that sense of, I want to try and celebrate. You know, one of the positive ways of coping with having a pretty horrible time was to try and celebrate it, which is where you kind of, that context of, you know, of having had children, having been a mother, having been a, you know, still am a lover, you know, that's all part of my life, and that even though I'm in this sort of period of transformation or metamorphosis is one way I've sort of thought about it creatively, that I want to try and celebrate it. I think that's the trying to be positive about, you know, what kind of is a bit miserable in many ways. And I think what's been interesting, the piece of work you're talking about, I had I sort of consolidated my research for starting this final unit of the second year of my MA. And because there's so many symptoms and so much going on physically and emotionally, I felt that I needed to sort of narrow it down a bit. So I kind of was looking at wet and dry. So wet is the hot flushes, the night sweats, the crying. There appears with a lot of crying, and contrasted with the dryness, which, you know, is dry skin, dry vagina, dry eyes, dry mouth. So I kind of, and I felt I collected lots of visual images, which again you can see the research images on my blog, that were obviously coming initially from natural states, and the kind of the ripples of sand in the desert, and the ripples that the water makes on the sand at the beach. And so really sort of, and the idea of kind of water being life and dryness being death. And you know, menopause, I don't think of per se as being analogous to growing old. You know, I think aging's a separate thing. This is, you know, some women go through premature menopause because of hysterectomy or breast cancer or whatever. So you know, their hormone change might happen in their late 30s possibly. So I don't associate menopause with aging. I think they're two separate things. But at the same time, obviously, I am getting older. So there we go. So you've got life and death, wet and dry. How I sort of expanded those ideas out into sort of visual reference points. I then done a lot of reading of blogs of other women talking about their experience of menopause. And actually that has been so valuable, because unless you've got a good friend who's going through it in exactly the same way, there's no one to talk to who understands what you're going through. And I this notion of when everything falls away, that I used to say before I understood it, I feel like I'm dying. And that was quite a shocking thing to hear myself say. And it was a long time before I even told my partner that. And then when I was exploring the blogs, I suddenly found other women saying that. And it was such a relief, because I felt almost ashamed to be saying I feel like I'm dying. And then to read the other women from nowhere, out of the blue, that was the language that came to them to express how they felt. So there's that sort of element which ties in with the dry and the desert and the sand and the dust and the sort of image of bones in the desert. But also what I found in those blogs was this sense of violence. Now I've kind of talked about when I realised what was going on with menopause, it was like I'd been hit by a truck. It's like, you know, okay, yes, I know I'm getting a bit older and clunkier, but suddenly it's like, bam, there's all these things going on with you. So again, other women were talking about being hit in the face, being hit by a ton of bricks. So this kind of violence, it is like a violent thing that's suddenly hitting you and happening. So I've sort of been interested in incorporating that into the work as well. So this piece that Kim was talking about is from a half body cast. So I was lying down, sort of slightly knees bent, not fetal but slightly curved, and we cast the top half of me. And from that, I've been taking sort of what I call slithers, so kind of movement stroke or ripples from it. And there's a series of 5 of these. And then I don't quite know where I got the idea from, but I decided that I wanted to show the movement of what happens in an average night where you're getting either hot flushes or hot sweats. So you're kind of taking the covers off, steaming off, and then the next minute you're freezing cold and pulling the covers up and sort of into a fetal position. So I'm going from a sort of splayed open, kind of like steam, 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 and then back into a fetal position. And so I just took my phone to the bedroom and clipped it on the ladder and just sort of moved, lying on the mattress in a, obviously slightly more performed way, but just kind of put my head into the state of, this is what I do at night, this is how I move. I'm rolling backwards and forwards, and then projected that onto these slivers, because I felt that the slivers were capturing the kind of this sort of dry, fragmented sense, but I needed to put the motion into it. And I think that's how, again, you suddenly kind of go, oh, right, well, there's me being the dancer, the performer, which obviously comes from my previous practice. So this sense that I was going to stop doing that, being a costume designer, and do something new, actually, I'm now the dancer and thinking, what am I going to wear? I'm going to design the costume to film myself doing something to put into, which is I think, funny, not in a sense, not surprising, but hilarious. It's like, oh, right, now I'm the dancer performer in my own work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question. I hope that's described the piece a bit in terms
of
the layering. And then my partner Greg is a musician and composer, and he's creating soundscapes for some of the work. So I've kind of come to him with an idea and said, this is a piece about stillness, because in fact I've made 3 pieces called Stillness now. There's Stillness 1, 2 and 3. And it's because so much is going on in the body, with emotional upheaval and hormonal upheaval and hot one minute and cold the next. I crave a stillness. I don't want to be dead. I just want it all to stop. I just want to lie on my bed and be still. Nothing else going on. And so that's also what that piece is about. So the fragments are the stillness, and then there's this sort of continual wave of motion that's going on across it. And the sound has slightly more of the kind of, it has agitated sounds. I sort of voice recorded myself, and things that really annoy me are, we've got a dripping tap in the kitchen, and it can actually, if I'm in a slightly flustered state and that bloody tap's dripping, I can get a hot flush.
Wow.
There's a couple of other sounds that, they're just kind of irritating me, can trigger that as well. So the soundscape has more of and the smashing glass, that's the kind of violence thing I've explored through. It's like just smashing a honey jar, this kind of sense of the domestic. We carry on. I'm not saying women are more domesticated than men, but as the mother of this household, even though I only have one son still living at home, there's a sense of me is vested in domesticity, which I love. I don't feel it as a negative thing, but this is my house, my home. I like to cook, I like to be clean, and all of those things. And there's this sense of just still having to try and carry on with doing everything. And I don't have the energy to do all that stuff anymore. Because I just don't have the energy. So the honey, the breaking of glass, it's not a brick through a window. It's a smashed honey jar. It's this domestic sense that my existence as I knew it is just being decimated by this.
Which also brings it back to feeling that everything has just gone down the drain as well.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to find out if you think the same thing as I do. Do you feel that you helped to tackle your own perception of the stigma against the menopause as you started to unravel? I
don't think I had any stigma about
the one that was projected maybe onto.
Not sure I quite understand.
Well, I do believe that there is naturally a stigma about discussing the menopause overall, and I'm wondering if you think that your layers of expression help to unravel that stigma inside outside.
Yes, yeah. I remember my mum having hot sweats, but I wasn't really, as a teenager I wasn't particularly interested, it's like, and I had a good friend who was going through it not particularly nicely prior to me, so I think I was kind of more aware that it was coming, and I think she did suggest it to me, but I think that's the worst thing, is that you are so busy. I would say probably nowadays far more than certainly than my mum's generation, that as a middle-aged woman, you've probably at the peak of your, if you're a sort of career person, probably at the peak of it, because having maybe taken time out for children, you know, you've really got going, which is how I felt. It was like, right, I'm rocking now. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. And then this kind of, you know, this knockback, which, just pissed me off, you know. It's like, how dare you come along and upset my trajectory. I think it was difficult the first time this friend said to me, "Oh, I think you're in menopause." I'm like, no, I'm not. You know, it was the sense that the things that were external that were challenging were all the problem, as opposed to it being half the problem being me and being able to cope with those things. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's difficult to deal with, is if you're a busy woman. And it concerns me that, you know, I talk about women being at the peak of their career in their mid-50s or
But you were working in the creative industries as well.
But what about the lady who's still doing the cleaning at 6 a.m. in the morning in an office block in central London and getting up at 4 to get a bus? You know, that's pretty tough. I mean, I can say nothing compared to having to cope with that kind of pressures of how to get your income and to live. So I think that idea that we're so desperately trying to carry on doing what we're doing, to carry on with our success or just carry on with earning the money, that we're not facilitated to understand what's happening to us until we hit a crisis. And for a lot of women, I think that is leaving their job or having to leave their job. And I say, I don't know what happens to the women who do you see what I mean? So I think that's an area that really concerns me, that while you're really, really busy, you don't have the opportunity to acknowledge what's going on. I think that's where the conversation needs to happen. Because I was kind of in denial, not because I was like, oh, I'm not having the menopause, just I haven't got time to think about that.
But nobody set you up as well, like to have those informal conversations as you were leading up to that peak in your career.
Yeah.
To say, this is going to come along, it's a natural process, but however, here is how your organisation or company can support you.
Exactly.
That didn't happen. And I think that's a big thing right now about employment within the creative industries, that, like you said, you know, the level of work or the amount of work that women are now undertaking in modern society, we're all going to be hit by that truck. You know, but yet
and we don't get to retire till 67 now,
right,
you know.
But then who is really giving us any kind of information, which is why I really believe in your project and in your work, because I think it's, again, taking it back to, it's the universal conversation. This is something that will affect all women.
Yeah. I mean, I have friends who've breezed through it, you know, and then, but actually when I reflect back, I kind of think, actually, you were quite, you know, confrontational, and actually may not have realised themselves that although they didn't have hot flushes and night sweats, that actually they were hormonally influenced, shall we say. It was hormonal imbalance that influenced. And I think because until you get the noticeable physical symptoms, you know, if you're still having a period every month, which I still have periods, that more all over the place, that you don't, it's the things that you don't realise are menopause. You know, I didn't really start getting hot flushes until about the last 14 months. And I've been in perimenopause probably about 4 years. So, yeah, I think that's that tricky thing. Until you start getting the physical things where you kind of go, oh, I'm in it, how do you realise that your behaviour has changed, particularly if you are under pressure to be still doing that full-time job or full-time care or whatever. So that for me is, you know, when I kind of say, well, how long have I been? You kind of go, well, when did I start struggling? And this was the friend that was sort of, you know, had said to me, you know, maybe you need to do this, that and the other because I'm not sure you're coping. And I was just so defensive because I'm a coper, you know, I'm absolutely a coper. And for anyone to suggest that I wasn't coping, I took as an offence in a way. And I was an affront. Which now looking back on it is classic. You know, that wasn't a rational response to someone saying maybe you're maybe you need to maybe do less. But I think if somehow if I'd been prepared for that, then I might much more have said, oh my God, you're right, actually, no, I don't sleep very well, or whatever. I'm a bit all over the place. But I didn't know that I was in perimenopause.
Yeah, and
I was defensive to it.
You weren't able to know really at the time what the signs were, because it was only through this form of exploration that you've been able to understand more about your process. And there are so many other women in many different workplaces that won't be aware or have access to information that's informing them of those symptoms.
Yeah. And it's just I think it's the isolation. I mean, it was really funny. I went for, having got the time to do these things, I was doing a health check and I'd gone for a smear. And it's towards the end of the day, and the nurse, she was sitting at her desk, I'd say she was, in her 50s, and she was like, oh, I'm so stiff around my shoulders. And I think I said to her, I can't remember how it emerged, but I suddenly said, are you in menopause? And she said, yes.
Oh.
Because I get that stiffness. That was one of my early, I get it cyclically, but the terrible, terrible stiffness in the shoulders. And you kind of think, I didn't sleep funny. I haven't done anything. Suddenly started digging the garden. And again, that's, I didn't know that. And then she didn't realise that. And as she was doing my smear, we compared all the symptoms. It was like pretty much, yeah. And she'd been at work as a nurse in the GP surgery from 8:30, and she was due to finish at 4:30, and it was kind of 5:15. And she's going to get up and do that again the next day,
and then go home and be the domestic goddess. At the same. I mean, this really does kind of open people's eyes, including my own. I'm sure, just about my own understanding about what that truck is bringing.
Oh, you don't have to think about it yet.
But I think it's really important to understand, and I really do appreciate what you're doing with your work.
Thank you.
Honestly, I really am grateful, and I know that many other people will be too. But I just hope that you can have loads of our listeners that kind of jump onto your blog and find out when your next exhibition will be, which is in July.
That'd be great. I just want people to be talking, and I've had very interesting responses. Interestingly enough, more from men than women. I've seen sort of middle-aged women walk around the work, and occasionally, sort of eye contact's been made that sort of suggested know where you're coming from, or others are kind of like not really wanted to, and that's been quite interesting, and certainly a research area in itself. Young men are always taken in because the detail of the casting, I mean, every pore is there, so they're like, wow, look at that, and then get chatting, and then, oh my God, I didn't realise, didn't know about that. Older men, husbands, kind of go, oh yeah, my wife's been going through that for a while. So I think I've had more dialogue with men than I have with women, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think this is so interesting that I think we're going to have to maybe get you back on. I think we will have to get you back
See
on.
What happens next.
We can't. Yeah, we'll have to just get an update along the way. But thank you, Abigail. It's been really nice having you on.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. I have been Kimberly Artist, and this podcast was brought to you by Conscious Cosmos, a social enterprise working for the betterment of the creative industries. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @ConsciousCos. Please leave your comments below. Please keep your eyes and ears open for the next instalment of Grey Matters. Thank you for listening.